Okay. I'm going to get started for whoever's out there, and welcome. I don't know that there's anyone there that doesn't know me, but I'm Martha Nisley, your adult programming coordinator. And we're going to let folks settle into Zoom. I'll give you some instructions that might help if you haven't used this before. If you go to the top right corner of your screen and choose a speaker view, that's best so that you just see the person speaking, since there might be a lot of people in the room. And also, if you're having trouble seeing us, there's a video button on the lower left-hand side that you can start your video. You will get a chance to ask a question later. There's a chat button at the bottom, sort of in the middle, and you would click on that and then write your question in the box on the lower right-hand side later. And when we're done, there's a way to end the meeting. On the lower right-hand side, there's a red button when you're finished. And then you can join the service through live streaming at 11:15 through the website. So hopefully everyone's settled in. I'm joined in our virtual sanctuary by Carol Gay, the coordinator of the Credo series, and Alex Creech, our presenter. I also want to thank one of my RASD team members, Sheila Gallagher, who's been supporting us in this and helping a lot of other educators this week in her work. Before I turn the session over to Carol, I really want you to know that the staff has all of you in our hearts. We've been thinking about you all week. We've had some conversations with you and hope to keep connecting like this in the future. Finally, if for some reason we get kicked off the internet, you might try clicking on that link again, but if we're unable to continue, then this still will be recorded and we'll post it later. So Carol, would you like to start with your introduction?
Sure. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our first Credo presentation on Zoom. My name is Carol Gay, and I'm the Credo coordinator. Today, I'm happy to present our speaker. Her name is Alexandria Creech, but she goes by Alex. She attended here for about 2.5 years before she joined about 6 months ago. So you'll get to hear her fresh perspective on our congregation and what it means to her. Many of you may remember her from when she was our service leader in early December. So in a moment, I'll turn things over to Alex. She'll speak for about 20 minutes, then she will handle the question and answer session. Remember to write short, clear questions and submit only one each. Okay, Alex, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you. I really appreciate this opportunity in the weird space that it is. So as Carol said, my name is Alex Creech. My husband, Patrick, and I have been coming for a few years now. Our son, Donovan, is 3. He spends services with some amazing people in the nursery. We feel so blessed and happy to be a part of this community. This presentation isn't really the same as what I thought it would be several weeks ago when Carol asked me if I would be willing to share my credo. I guess if I had wanted, I could have trudged forth blindly, putting my fingers in my ears, pretending like all this didn't exist, blah, blah, blah. But it's really weird not to acknowledge it. These are frightening times, unprecedented, surreal, emotionally unexplainable. Most of us are coming to the slow realization that we're in this for the long haul, and we have a long way still to go. Our physical, emotional, financial, and mental healths are at stake. What do we do? I mean, literally, what do we do? I've run out of laundry to wash. I've watched Wreck-It Ralph 12 times by now. I experimented with baking bread in my new Instant Pot. I don't recommend it. It was awful. I've had 3 staff meetings, a doctor's appointment, a therapy session, and a girls' night all through my webcam. I'm wearing a nice shirt, but we all know I'm wearing sweatpants underneath this. So that being said, here is what I actually came to talk about. From the ages of birth to 4, I had what you could call an untraditional upbringing. I was born when my mother was 17. My parents married early and raised me while they were in college. From 4 to 13, I had a traditional upbringing. Mom, dad, little sister, cat, a house with a swing set in the backyard. From 13 to 18, so those teenage years, I went through what you could call the typical rebellious stage. My younger sister was seen as a pest, and I felt like I was completely different from everyone in my family and in my town. I was the voracious reader and complete nerd that dreamed of escaping small town life. I listened to screamo and hardcore music. I painted my nails black. I read books on witchcraft, a true embarrassment to my parents and our town of 2,200 people. I first discovered Wicca and paganism through a series of young adult books I read in middle school. For some reason, I think a lot of young girls go through a witchcraft phase. Maybe it's the feeling of power it gives us as we grow up and realize that we aren't the ones actually in power. While it doesn't always stick for all women, it stuck for me, and it's been a part of my life for decades at this point. Naturally, beliefs like these tend to raise eyebrows in the Deep South, so I'll blah, blah, blah over the social distancing from my peers, the anger from my mother, and the loneliness when you have beliefs that are within a small minority, since that's not the real purpose of this credo. Suffice to say, it's just important to know that I went a long time without a true religious family and a sense of belonging. Once I got out of the house, so from 18 to 30 or so, was eventful, but within the realms of what most people would call normal still. My parents divorced, remarried, I married and divorced myself, bought a house, remarried to Patrick, and had our beautiful son, Donovan. I went to college, I taught, still teach, I act in local productions, I grew and lost and grew friends. My relationship with my mother was strained and at times non-existent, but many people in life have mother issues. This past Thanksgiving weekend, I read my personal reflection during our December 1st service. As many of you know, I spoke about my relationships with my family. I focused primarily on the revelation that due to a 23andMe test that I gifted my dad and ourselves for Christmas, that my dad, the man who raised me my entire life, was not my biological father, and how I needed to rediscover my mythology. So here I am, questioning my entire mythology and what it means to be me. The eye shape that I thought came from my dad didn't. The pale, easily burned skin I thought was inherited from my grandmother wasn't. Does my cynical sense of humor and intelligence come from my dad? My fierce loyalty for my family? It's a nature versus nurture debate I expect I'll never be able to answer. I won't go back over the entire reflection, but I do want to spend some time talking about the impact it's had on rethinking who I am and where I come from. I feel like amidst all this, my biological father, Andrew, and I are simultaneously both Ahab and Moby Dick to each other. We're both on a quest to find the truth, to scratch the itch, chase down something that we feel will finally make us complete. We're also each other's truth. In his case, the answer to an unfinished question, and in mine, the answer to a question I didn't even know existed. We both had to make the decision as to whether or not to leave the dock and venture into the unknown, with the possibility of getting hurt, damaged, soul torn, or worse. We both had to decide if it was worth it. We're both obsessing over what this means for us in the future, that is, where we're going. I started with all the navigation tools, printing off his resume and Googling him, archiving our messages as transcripts into a Google Drive folder, verifying stories with an outside party, creating a timeline on Microsoft Excel, and trying to poke holes in it again and again and again. While I compare the two of us to a Herman Melville novel, or maybe something more akin to Shakespeare's Comedy of Errors, Andrew likened our relationship to the myth of Tantalus, at least from his point of view as I was growing up. Here's a quote of how he described it to me. Do you know the etymology of the word tantalizing? We use it incorrectly in our lexicon, being snorty Americans, of course, but it evolved from the Greek mythos of Tantalus. Tantalus was a demigod, born of a Zeus-nymph union, and he is sort of a complicated fellow. He supposedly stole ambrosia for the mortals and revealed secrets of Olympus, which made him a hero among men. However, he apparently loved being a demigod so much, he sacrificed his child into a feast for the gods, to which they did not partake and were angered by. In other words, totally misread the situation. But the most important takeaway about Tantalus was his punishment. See, Tantalus was cast into Tartarus and chained to an islanded fruit tree for eternity. Starving and dying of thirst, he could reach for the fruit hanging from the tree, but it would be just out of his grasp. The waters would lap at his feet, but would recede before he could drink. So, for his sins, he would perpetually always reach and never be allowed to touch. In our story, I am Tantalus and you are the fruit. I hate casting you as plant life, but roll with the metaphor for a sec. For a very, very long time, I was allowed to reach, but forces and personalities would always pull you or push me away. This is what he wrote to me in one of our very first email exchanges after I found out the truth and he had contacted me. I remember the moment we decided to throw out the compass, to destroy the map. After several weeks of talking online, we finally met in person at the wonderfully hipster coffee shop Amelie's. All of my deep conversations have happened there since moving to Charlotte. I don't know how. The talk with a friend that led to my final decision to get a divorce, the first night that Patrick and I talked as more than friends, the late night into early morning coffee and croissant conversations after a play with the cast of the latest production I was in. So when he asked to meet me, I knew where I would choose. We hugged, of course, but I wasn't expecting it to feel so natural, so immediately parental. We held tight for some time before breaking apart and finally sitting down. We both laughingly acknowledged our shaking hands and then just stared at each other, just taking each other in. It was surreal to realize this was him. This was my father. This was the man who apparently fought so hard for years to be part of my life before losing me due to all these horrible circumstances. I won't give a play-by-play of the entire 3-hour conversation. Suffice to say, it was appropriately riddled with emotion, laughter, stories, and deep introspection. It's so surreal how normal it felt. His face seemed so familiar and familial to me. We never lacked conversation. Any dead air felt comfortable. Those hours went by in a blink. We dumped our similar and various insecurities about this situation in a pile on the table to sort through, one by one. We reassured, reinforced, readjusted. And we ultimately found security we both, I think, desperately needed. He worried that he was coming on too strong and was absolutely terrified of messing up my life. He told me I was beautiful and smart and that he was all in as much as I wanted him to be. He said he was so incredibly happy and that even if this was the most that our relationship ever became, he would live happy. He said, "You never realize the weight of the incomplete until now," and that his wife had noticed how much lighter, happier he had been in the past 3 weeks. Meeting him was amazing and heart-pounding and perfectly imperfect. It was everything I could have hoped for and more. It felt right. It felt comfortable. It near about made us both lose it in the midst of a packed French coffee shop multiple times. It was enjoyable. It was enough. I mentioned in my reflection last December that a longtime mentor of mine, a man I love deeply and consider to be a full-time friend and part-time dad, gave me a lot of advice when all this was happening to me. He's the one who told me about how my mythology is what has changed, not who I am as a person. He's a retired English teacher, and I feel I need to directly quote some of the things he said to me, as merely summarizing them wouldn't do him justice. So he said, "We are driven to know, as Tennyson said, to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. Our soul, our heart, is always overruled by our head, by what we think is right, by what we believe is right, by what society and everyone else tells us is right. But our heart knows better. Our soul is a private preserve that most often gets walled off in the name of logic or the right thing or really fear. We don't understand the feelings we generate in our heart or soul. We're much happier controlling the things that we reason out and find precedent for. But when something comes along that shakes our soul and heart, we retreat to logic and reason. We get God Almighty scared, and the head tries to take control." Even though I've rarely felt physically alone, I've still always felt spiritually alone. I've never really been around people with the same beliefs as me. My husband, Patrick, while always being 100% supportive, still isn't pagan. And there's a difference between being accepting and feeling the same spiritually. Throughout all this, I've struggled with my spirituality, with finding my sense of balance. It seems like every time I think I've found my equilibrium, I'm smacked in the face with a pool noodle. Like, I also found out that my biological father, Andrew, is also pagan, and for nearly the same amount of decades that I have been too. What would it have been like growing up to know him, to know I wasn't as spiritually alone as I thought? How would it have felt to share the changing of the seasons with him, to light candles at Yule together, or plant seeds at Astara, or walk through the woods, listening to the sounds of the animals and the trees rattling their leaves in the wind above? To know I wasn't alone, that I wasn't crazy or weird or satanic, to have someone who really got it. You know the phrase, "when it rains, it pours"? I don't think it always has to be a negative one. After all, rain is a good thing. It provides growth and washes away impediments. For me, for the last 3 years, this rain of spiritual fulfillment and purpose has poured down on me, and I've considered myself blessed. The first rainfall was around 2 years ago when we first started attending the UU. Patrick and I long ago decided we would join a church either whenever we ran out of things to talk about or we had a child. Donovan was born first, which is impressive considering we work at the same school and spend 75% of our day together. We both had grown up with Christian backgrounds, and while neither of us saw ourselves as Christian anymore, we both still saw the benefit of growing up in a church with a community of people outside school who shared similar beliefs and spiritual morals and ethics. We both knew of Unitarian Universalism, and it appealed to us. We know how accepting it was and how we wouldn't be forced to put ourselves in a box of rigidity and unyielding dogma. Plus, the church is 5 minutes away from our house. Since we first came, I've always felt so welcomed and loved. It's hard sometimes with a congregation as large as this one, but I've always felt a strong sense of belonging. And I'm so happy to share that sense of community with Donovan as well. Never have I felt judged, or that I'm doing it wrong, or that I have to change my inherent beliefs and morals in order to be accepted here. I walk away from each service feeling fulfilled, inspired, and given something to chew on throughout the week. My beliefs and the philosophy of the church go hand in hand, rather than being at odds. I feel like I belong. The second rainfall, as I mentioned above, was finding out Andrew was pagan as well. Suddenly, I not only had an accepting church who loved me for who I am, but now I finally had a family who felt the same way. The third rainfall came this past fall. I was performing in the play St. Joan with Free Rein Theater. I've worked with them several times before, and I consider myself good friends with everyone already. However, it wasn't until we loaded into the Duke Theater space and us women started spending a lot of time together in the dressing room that I noticed some odd things. One of them made a small altar at her station. Another offered to read someone their tarot cards. Another shared a silly meme about moon magic. I took all this in quietly, not wanting to break the, spell around me. I remember I went home after rehearsal that night, walked in the house, and said to Patrick, "So I think the girls are witches." And they are. And since then, my spiritual desert has been so full of life and joy that it seems hard to believe. In the span of 2 years, I went from feeling completely alone in my beliefs and spirituality to being slammed with a joyful, welcoming congregation, a surprise biological father with similar beliefs, and not one but 5 strong witches I consider dear friends. Let it not be said that the gods don't have a sense of humor. You feel spiritually alone? Fine, bam. Now you have similarly spiritual people on all sides. You got a husband, you got a church, you got friends. I even got you a family member, which was not easy to do, so you're welcome. It's been because of these gifts that I've been able to wrestle with who I am in a safe, comforting environment. It's been hard and continues to be hard, and sometimes I have to take it day by day or hour by hour. Some days I wake up and the enormity of everything smacks me in the face with a pool noodle again. But my spiritual bedrock is now firmly fixed. My mythology may continue to be a mess, but that doesn't have to change who I, Alex Creech, am. And I am loved, blessed, comforted, and welcomed. And for now, that's enough. So, I want to say thank you to everybody. I really appreciate you taking the time to listen to me talk. So now, if you want to ask me any questions, as Martha said, you can click on the chat button at the bottom of your screen and just type a question, and I'll do my best to answer them as much as I can. So I'll just give you guys a couple minutes if anybody has any. and drink some coffee. Oh, thanks. Okay. So from Jay, I have, is there a particular myth with which you are now identifying? That's a really great question. Because, you know, my biological father compared this to being Tantalus. It feels so chaotic. It feels like in some ways, it's more like a pantheon rather than just a specific myth. So I guess my life kind of felt like Celtic mythology, so nice, earthy, homey, and all that. And now I'm in the middle of some super intense family drama, which I guess is more akin to Greek mythology there, or maybe sometimes Norse mythology with all the, constant butting heads and weirdness like that. So yeah, more like pantheons than specific myths. Hey, I'd binge watch me on Netflix too. Thanks. If there's no other questions, then we can go ahead and call it a day and head on over to service. So any last questions for me? I really appreciate this. I do. I know that this was such a weird, kind of confusing way of doing it, but thank you. This is awesome. Thank you, Carol, for the opportunity.
And thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks. So I guess we'll head over to service.
Bless you.
Thanks, guys. You can click leave meeting at the bottom right-hand corner.